Okay, welcome everyone. This is, I think, something like the fifth class in this series on Nagarjuna's text letter to a friend. So tonight, Mary can't join us, Mary Lutz, who normally puts the prayers up. So I'm going to put them up on my screen and share them. So hopefully you've got those in front of you then. And Jana has kindly offered to lead us in prayers again tonight. So
We'll begin with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which we'll recite 3 times in English.
to the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, thou transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, go for refuge.
To the
Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan. I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
We'll do the short mandala offering once in English.
This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field on offering. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
We'll do refuge in bodhicitta once in English, twice in Tibetan. I
Go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodam sokhi chognam la, jamchu bardu dakni kyab suchi, daki chanyan gi peso namgi, rola penchir sangye druparsho. Sangye chodam sokhi chognam la, jamchu bardu dakni kyab suchi, Daki chanyan gi pe sonam gi, drala penchir sangye druparsho. Okay, good. Let's do a short meditation before we start the class. Give ourselves an opportunity to focus the mind a bit. So the first few minutes, we'll just meditate on the breath. Again, use whatever technique you prefer in terms of working with the breath. And then I'll come in a few minutes and lead you in a short reflection so we can set our motivation together for tonight's class. So I'll ring the bell here in the Gompa to start the meditation. Now, to set our motivation, let's go back to the very basic truth that is a starting point for all the Buddhist teachings. The simple fact that each and every being, ourselves included, simply wants to be happy and wants to not suffer. And this is a very profound place to start from, actually. Because we see when we turn our mind towards the Buddha's teachings, as we're doing in this text, that we've actually been going about achieving that result in the wrong way. And most beings are ignorant of the true path to happiness, ignorant of the ways to diminish and eventually eliminate our suffering. And the Buddha says that having that desire is perfectly fine. How we fulfill it is another story. So when we turn our own minds towards these teachings, it's important we start with a wish to fulfill our own basic needs of wanting to be happy and wanting to be free from suffering. To be here tonight from that place, to see that the Buddha's teachings can help us to find exactly what it is that we need and that we desire. Temporal happiness, high status, good rebirths, as well as the happiness of liberation, being free once and for all from all of our sufferings, all the causes of suffering. We come to the conclusion that that's not enough because we see that all other beings are just like us in wanting to be happy as well, wanting to not suffer. And it would be very short-sighted and selfish of us if we only tended to our own welfare and excluded the welfare of others. So we go beyond that motivation of our own well-being to embrace the idea of enacting the welfare of all sentient beings without exception. Every single being, the object of this compassionate thought, this loving thought that wishes to place all beings in happiness and free all sentient beings from all dissatisfaction and suffering. And in order to do that, we have to become a Buddha ourselves. We have to develop our qualities to the greatest degree. We have to remove everything that obscures our minds. We have to become fully enlightened. So this is bodhicitta. This is our motivation for these teachings, as well as for this life, as well as for all lifetimes, all the way up to complete enlightenment. A sincere wish to work on ourselves to the greatest degree, so we can then help others perfectly. And hold this motivation deeply in your heart. You can slowly open your eyes completely, and we'll get started. Okay, so we are working our way gradually through this text. Can recall that this text was written by Arya Nagarjuna, this amazing master, probably around the 1st century, 2nd century. He was renowned as the person who came in the footsteps of the Buddha, in a sense, some 500, 600 years later, who would reveal the Mahayana, particularly the middle way path. So this is a collection of advice, verses of advice that was given to his friend who was a king in India at the time. So there's a lot of it that pertains more particularly to people who are lay practitioners like ourselves. You know, at least there's no monastics joining in this audience right now. But there's also certainly advice that's being given at times pertaining to monastics. And this very first section that we're in is applicable really to both ordained and lay practitioners. So we are working our way through that. Let me actually let me show the text. Again, these are the verses. You can, there's a copy of the verses that has been put out on the website. We had this first part, a recommendation to heed, 3 verses just kind of encouraging us to listen to this. Then we have the rest of the text is the actual instruction, the remaining 123 verses, I think it is. So everyone online could please be sure to mute your microphones, just because we're getting a little feedback in the TV here. But let me, maybe I can do that too from here. There, I think I did it. Is your microphone off, John? Yeah, you're muted, I think so. All right, so let's go back to the text again. Whoops, sorry. Do this. Get my Zoom fingers back on. So we had, again, this first part within the actual instruction. The first is general advice concerning virtuous practices. Again, one of the most important things we can do with this human life is to engage in virtue. Then there is a first section of this. There are the general advice for both householders, lay people, and those who have departed from the home life, monastics, in other words, monks and nuns who have dedicated their lives to practicing the Dharma. There are 3 sections to this first part. The 6 remembrances, which we looked at, remembering the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, generosity, morality, and the deities. Then we looked at the 10 paths, which are the 10 virtuous paths that we want to adopt that are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues. We looked at abstaining from alcohol, intoxicants, and the like, to have a good livelihood, to see that wealth is ephemeral and insubstantial, and then to be more generous with the wealth that we do have. That's actually as far as we made it, because there are quite a bit of pages of commentary that we're working with on that. So again, we see that generosity is being emphasized as one of the main practices. But I'm going to go back to the text and repeat just a little bit that I went through last time. Hopefully you have the commentary on the screen here. Is that on generosity? It says generosity combined. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we did read this last time, but I want to read it again. So generosity is important because it creates the karma of having resources. When we combine it with morality, as it says here, that will result in great wealth that is enjoyed in a life as a deity or a human. Whereas particularly we want this human life because of the amazing opportunity we possess with these human bodies to practice, especially the tantric path. But nonetheless, we don't want that the karma of that generosity to ripen in the form in a existence as an animal, for example. We could end up like our pets, or like Leona Helmsley's dog that I mentioned last time, who had like millions of dollars that it received as the estate from Leona Helmsley, but it couldn't even do anything meaningful with all that money, right? So it says there, and since in that state, as a human, for example, one practices still more liberality, more generosity, supported by morality, the enjoyment of ample fruits in subsequent lives will be unending. So this is how we actually make the best opportunity of this life. Of course, it's ideal if we can get enlightened, if we can achieve all these major results, but at least use what we have to practice generosity and morality, these 2 combined. Remember, those are the 2 main causes of achieving a good rebirth as a human. The third is to make the prayers for that, to make stainless prayers that are not together with any kind of worldly attachment. So then it says, therefore, so that such merit as liberality, generosity will not go to waste, the following verse is stated as an injunction to observe morality. So again, this is the commentary from Randawa that I was reading. Now we go back to the root verses. So verse 7, you should practice a morality, unbroken, not debased, undefiled, untainted, uncorrupted. Morality was declared the foundation for all virtue, just as the earth is for all things moving and unmoving. So again, morality is the primary cause for getting a good rebirth like this human existence. You have to practice complete acts of virtue. Refraining from killing, refraining from stealing, and so on, in order to plant the seeds that will ripen into a good rebirth. If we don't do that, you don't have the raw material from which a good rebirth is born, is created. But again, we need these additional practices of generosity so that we aren't born as a human being in an area where we're bereft of resources and can't even, sustain our lives, for example. And we know human beings in this world who have that misfortune right now, who have been unable to use the life that they have in the most meaningful way, because they're spending their time continually just looking for the resources to survive day by day. So let's go back to, again, remember that this verse in particular was referred to early on when we did the 6 recollections, because morality was one of the 6 recollections. And it said the details on what we mean by good morality will be coming up in verse 7. So we're there now. Let's take a look at what all these adjectives mean. The unbroken, not debased, undefiled, untainted, uncorrupted. And that's on the next page of the commentary here. So in essence, the verse simply states that one should practice morality. What qualities should one's moral practice possess? It should be unbroken in that one does not transgress even a single one of the precepts which have been accepted. Of course, we use the term breaking our vows. So the precepts or vows that we take, we want to hold them purely. And of course, any other commitments we make around our behavior, especially when we do our purification and we make a resolve to not do particular actions for some period of time. We want to be very clear about any commitments or precepts we make so that we don't break those. And breaking them simply causes them to get weaker and weaker so that we don't have the ability to uphold them. The next sentence, the morality should not be debased in that one does not transgress them in large number. So I think Geshe Sopa in his commentary that we're using as a supplement to this, I think he combines those two and calls it unimpaired, meaning that we don't have any transgression of our vows, and we certainly don't transgress them in large number then, so that we're kind of really breaking our vows in a serious way. Undefiled, the next adjective, in that it is not polluted by non-virtuous thoughts. Sounds strange that, if you're practicing morality, how could your morality be polluted by non-virtuous thoughts? Because morality seems to be a virtuous behavior, right? But sometimes we engage in behaviors that are virtuous out of delusion. We might even be attached to the praise that we get if we're seen as very generous, for example. So we give lots of money, waiting for everyone to, fill our ears with all sorts of wonderful praise that they give us because we're such a generous, kind-hearted person, right? So we can do a lot of virtue with deluded minds, as ulterior motives, things that drive us to behave in particular ways, right? Again, we have to check our own behavior. To what degree are we still attached to doing things out of non-virtue? Even though they're good acts, you will get some merit out of those good acts, but you will also have the sort of demerit or the lack of merit and a deficiency in merit because you've done them out of non-virtuous motivation. So we have to be careful with this and not pollute our virtues and our good actions with non-virtue. Our morality also, it says there, it should be untainted in that its practice is not dedicated towards the purpose of continued existence or material wealth. In other words, we want to have as high of a motivation for our practice of morality as possible. Again, continued existence makes it sound like we can't dedicate it for future lives, but that's where our Dharma practice begins, is to at least have in mind that we want to create the causes for good rebirths, not primarily so we can enjoy the leisure of those lives, but so that we can actually make good use of those lives by continuing our spiritual practice. That's why we need it, continuity of good rebirths. But certainly we don't do it for material wealth and for all of what comes, the pleasures from wealth and what have you. We do it with the idea that we need these things in place in order to continue our spiritual development. It's very hard if we fall into a lower realm or if we don't have ideal conditions, even in a human existence, to continue our Dharma practice. You have to have that energy behind it and the proper conditions that allow us to do that. And then it says, finally, the morality should be uncorrupted in that just such a moral practice does not change into any other form. It doesn't become, again, the cause for anything else. Rather, it is kind of true. And well, I think the word that was used here was like self-controlled even. We make sure that we kind of control where that energy goes to through our thoughts, dedications, and what have you. So again, Geshe Sopa, when he talked about these, he used a slightly different explanation. The first one, again, he said was unimpaired, and it meant very similar to unbroken. The second one was not degraded, and he said that would be where our motivation should be without the flaws of the three poisons. He singled out them in particular. Remember, our three poisons are the minds of attachment, anger or aversion, and ignorance. Try to, as much as possible, keep our actions that we engage in unpolluted by those. And then he had the third one that he only had four for some reason, is unsullied, which meant that it's together with the antidotes to the three delusions, which is non-attachment, non-hatred or non-anger, and non-ignorance, which are different than just the absence of those. Those are actually like non-attachment is the mind that actually has an ability to have a contentment with what we have and to rejoice in the things that we can make good use of and what have you, not being attached to them as ours and so on. And then non-anger or non-hatred is actually the mind of love. It becomes the basis for loving kindness towards others. And non-ignorance becomes, of course, wisdom. We can actually do our actions with wisdom. So that's the third one he said. And then the fourth one was free from contamination, which he defined as not kind of smeared by the worldly motivation, kind of not having a desire for just the comforts of this life and so on. What we call the eight worldly dharmas, which are coming up in a verse before too long. Nagarjuna will deal with those and we'll talk about those briefly. I did a whole course on those December of not last year, the year before for all of you. So again, we did look at those before. All right, so those are again kind of giving us an idea of how our morality should have a real pure nature to it. Don't let any of these afflictions pollute it. Don't have any of our attachment to what we might gain in this life. Certainly our reputation, all of these other things. Try to make it as pure as possible and bringing about the best results then from our generosity. So let's go to the next paragraph where it says, because a moral practice having such qualities brings liberation from the slavery of samsaric existence, it constitutes freedom. Again, because we want to keep our goals in what we call definite goodness, which means liberation and enlightenment. We don't want to simply have things dedicated for a good rebirth. That will come, by the way, if we have the mind that is aspiring to achieve complete freedom from suffering and so on. So then he says, such a moral practice is thus praised by the sages, by the wise, the Aryas. Again, this word Arya is a Sanskrit word which means superior. This means all the beings who are technically Sangha jewels. Remember, we defined the Sangha when we did the recollection of the Sangha. The Sangha in its most truthful way, in its most kind of, what's the word for it, comprehensive way, is embodying all those beings who have had direct realization into emptiness, meaning someone who has that superior vision, who has actually achieved that level of wisdom and is progressing or has already achieved liberation or enlightenment. So this is the idea, is that such a moral practice is praised by these beings who have attained that direct realization because they know this is the means for accomplishing it. Getting a good rebirth through good morality, continuing to develop that positive potential eventually leads to developing concentration, eventually leads to developing wisdom. We're going to see that coming up in the last paragraph here. All right, it says there in the next paragraph, an explanation. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped that last sentence. It also leads to the attainment of samadhi. Samadhi is the Sanskrit word for meditative stabilization, concentration, because the mind becomes composed when one is endowed with morality. And as I said, this is going to be talked about when we get to the last paragraph where we see that that's the second training. The first training is morality. The second training is concentration. The third is wisdom. Next paragraph. An explanation can also be given through a statement from the Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Knowledge by Vasubandhu, in chapter 4, which is the chapter on karma. It says, untainted by immorality, that's the first way of describing it, or its cause, that's a second way of describing it, untainted by the cause of immorality, based upon its antidote and peace. These are similar maybe to what Geshe Zopa shared in that commentary, right? Geshe Zopa said that it should be untainted by any immorality. In other words, kind of the same as what we meant by unbroken, that it should be free of the causes of immorality. In other words, the three root poisons, that it should be based upon the antidotes to those, and that it should be peace. Again, he defined peace or free from contamination as not smeared by worldly concerns, worldly motivation. But again, there's a description we're being given here by Venerable Rendawa as well. So he says, it is indicated by this that one's moral practice should be endowed with 4 qualities. The practice should be unbroken through not being tainted by immoral conduct, particularly the mental afflictions. Again, that's kind of the second way that we would talk about things. So, so these two together constitute 2, unbroken in terms of not being tainted by immoral conduct, and unbroken in terms of not being tainted by the mental afflictions. Thirdly, it should be undefiled through reliance upon such practices as meditation upon the impurity of the body, which constitute antidotes to the mental afflictions. That's what I mentioned that Keshe Sopa said, which should be together with any of the antidotes to attachment, non-attachment then, non-ignorance, non-anger, non-hatred. Finally, the 4th one, it should be untainted through being maintained by the aspiration for the peace of nirvana, which implies that it's not for worldly concern, right? Worldly motivation. Everything is for something beyond this world, something that transcends this world. All right, last paragraph of this section for this verse. One may ask what value adhering to such morality has. The Buddha has declared that just as the earth is the foundation for all things, we saw this in the verse from Nagarjuna, moving and unmoving, those things that are stationary like rocks and mountains, of course they move even with the movement of the earth, but nonetheless, we mean that those big things that don't have motility from their own side, also for beings who are moving. Morality is the foundation for meditative concentration, wisdom, and so forth. That is, for everything of merit, both worldly and transcendental. Since one endowed with morality will be free from such hindrances as regret and so on, one can gradually attain samadhi. We're going to talk about regret and so on as some of the hindrances or obstacles to developing concentration or samadhi in a later verse. So when you have good morality, you don't have those states of mind so much. They can be controlled very easily. And then you have a basis for developing concentration. The next sentence, with the attainment of mental composure, there can arise the true and exact vision of transcending awareness, wisdom. And it is by means of this transcending awareness that one ultimately attains deliverance, the elimination of the mental afflictions. So this paragraph is a saying, if you ask, well, what's the value of having good morality? Well, morality is the foundation. Morality is where it starts. You lay the ground of morality that helps you to not just, get rid of the overt behavior through our speech and physical actions, but even begins to tame the mind so that we lessen the thoughts of harming others and so on that we normally have. That becomes a foundation for having that composure that we need in our meditative concentration. Otherwise, when we sit down to meditate, and I always mention this, like if you've just had an argument earlier that day with somebody, and it's still like running around in your head, and you got really upset and really angry with them. Well, it's very hard to calm the mind on the cushion then, right? You sit down to meditate, and it's just like this hamster wheel of stuff that keeps going and going and going, the rumination, everything. So we know even from little examples like that, if you aren't maintaining good conduct and behavior with others and with yourself, it's very hard for the mind to settle. So on the basis of morality, concentration, samadhi can be developed. On the basis of deepening your concentration, you can then introduce the wisdom, especially again, the wisdom realizing emptiness that all these aryas have attained. You can introduce that conceptually first and eventually know it in a non-conceptual way, uniting our concentration with wisdom. And we'll get some more teachings on that later in this text as well. This is obviously the main goal that we are striving for in our Buddhist practice. Now, again, as I keep highlighting, this text is mainly for people who are not living a life of austerities and meditating for years on end in caves and wherever they, have a place to meditate. This is mainly for householders, like the king, who was kind of running a whole kingdom and doing all the things that people do in terms of being preoccupied with many different activities. So this isn't necessarily our main practice, but if we don't develop good morality in this life, well, then there's no guarantee that in a next life or a future life where we have more ideal conditions to dedicate our life more fully to Dharma, that we'll be able to have that foundation there either, right? everything we do creates a habit, a pattern that is carried over. So if you ever want to develop all three trainings, the higher training of morality, the higher training of concentration, the higher training of wisdom, that are essential for both liberation and enlightenment, you have to start now with practicing good morality. That's where it all starts. I may have mentioned this previously, but I do a lot of work with our interfaith group in Santa Fe, the Interfaith Leadership Alliance. I think even there, I've heard that comment of kind of like, and it comes out of some of the theistic traditions, that how can you have a foundation for morality if you don't believe in God? Well, and Buddhism doesn't hold to a creator God, but we actually have a pretty sound way of dealing with morality that has to do with the principles of karma that we already discussed a little bit in terms of the 10 non-virtues and adopting the 10 virtues. And of course, recognizing that this is uh, instrumental in our spiritual path, as we're doing tonight with this verse. Having good morality is the foundation for everything else that you're able to achieve. If you don't have that, forget about developing these other qualities and abilities on the path. They just aren't going to come because we don't have a sort of settled mind to begin with. Again, I don't have that experience of having generated deep concentration, but we obviously see that when you are able to develop deep concentration, you quell the afflictions even more. They don't arise easily at all because the mind becomes very single-pointedly focused, and there's no room for them to arise in a sense. Excuse me. But we already begin the process of doing that, as I said, with good morality, because then we become attentive to our minds as well as, again, our speech and our actions. So this is where it all begins, and this is what Nagarjuna is trying to emphasize with this verse. Let's go on then to the third and final section of this very first part. This is on the 6 paramitas. Again, these are the main practices, the perfections of a bodhisattva. So bodhisattvas, again, are those beings who are dedicated to achieving Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. Some of what we've already looked at, generosity and morality, for example, are repeated in the very first 2 of the 6 perfections. But nonetheless, we get a little introduction to them here. Again, I did a course back in 2021, I think, online for all of you on the called Transcending Our Limitations, where we talked about all 6 of the perfections. So I'm not going to go into that level of detail, because I think, again, this text is meant to introduce things, not necessarily provide that level of detail for all of these subjects. Otherwise, we'll be on these 6 perfections for several weeks. So here it says, this is the instruction to abide in the Mahayana path of the 6 paramitas or perfections. The following verse is stated to illustrate that after having initially purified oneself through practicing the 10 virtuous deeds, liberality and morality, as explained above, one should train oneself properly in the 6 paramitas of the Mahayana path. So this is kind of the progression of our practice. After we have engaged in a good practice of generosity and morality, that we try to adopt as much of the 6 perfections as we can. Though again, the Buddha in his kindness did give advice about which of the perfections householders like ourselves should engage in primarily, versus those that are more appropriate for monastics and people who have greater time to dedicate to the spiritual path. So here they're introduced, again, that word in this, it's a bit antiquated in this translation, liberality or generosity, morality, the 2nd perfection, the 3rd, patience, effort, the 4th, meditation, and likewise wisdom, the 5th and 6th. Develop these immeasurable paramitas, and having crossed the sea of existence, become the Lord of victors. The word paramita actually means to transcend, to go beyond, and literally to go beyond to the other shore. Kind of the shore of samsara is where we are at. We want to go to the shore of nirvana. So it's the idea that we are going to transcend and go completely outside of this conditioned existence that we are involved in. And of course, we do that with the aim of benefiting all beings to get them to that same shore. So here we're introduced to them in this paragraph. There's really not a whole lot of description of any of these. I may talk a little bit more about them, but again, I don't want to go into great detail. Giving away of all one's possessions, personal wealth, and even one's body constitutes liberality. Let's talk about generosity just a little bit more. Oftentimes in the presentation of the perfection of generosity, we talk about 3 main things that we can be generous with. The first is our material goods and wealth. And of course, that would include our bodies. Bodies is included in here, but know that the ability to give one's body in its entirety is a very high practice. And you're not encouraged to do that unless you've reached a certain level of practice where you have absolutely no attachment to your life in this body because you've developed that deeper wisdom. For most of us, we're still quite attached to these bodies, and we might have no qualms about maybe giving a pint of blood here or, whatever we can to help others in some way. But we shouldn't go beyond what we are comfortable with. Even I admire people who like give some of their internal organs or extra kidney or whatever, to somebody who needs it. I think people even have they donated lungs? I think you can donate a lung, perhaps, and eyes, I don't know, but it's best to not give beyond what you are comfortable with, but to always hold the wish that your body could become wish fulfilling for others, could become a source of whatever others need. But the main thing we do have an opportunity to practice in this life is material generosity, giving to others in need. Or again, we went through those objects. Remember the fields that we looked at in the last class? We have the field of misery or suffering. We have the field of benefit, those who have benefited us, and the field of qualities, those beings with great qualities. So you can practice generosity in material things. It's a very important part of our practice to not be miserly and tight with all of that. But know that there's also two other forms of generosity we can do. One is giving protection to others. That's a very powerful thing, right? Beings who are more vulnerable, who have the potential to experience great suffering, we can do what we can to help them, to protect them from that. We have lots of agencies in our society that do that for people, right? Providing homes for women who need to be away from an abusive situation, children who are orphaned or who have need to be fostered, and all these things. Those are big acts, but if you can't do those acts yourself, you can also give money to agencies that do those sorts of things, right? So what's wonderful about, we can find many ways to be able to support protecting others from suffering, from fear, from harm. The third is actually said to be the most important of these practices of generosity. And that's actually giving the Dharma. Now, again, not every one of us feels like we're able to teach the Dharma to others really skillfully, but we can find ways, hopefully, teaching through our own example, even, right? When you're with other people and say those people like to want to go out hunting animals, for recreation. And we can maybe just attest to our own stance in something like that, and why we don't do that, and why we've, given up killing beings and so on. And maybe they'll be affected by that, maybe they won't. But if they see how true we are to our example and the positive changes that come about when we do engage in practice of the Dharma, then we become an example for them, a way to help them to see the value of the Dharma in their own lives. But you can also teach others without even talking about Dharma, right? You can just, somebody calls you up and they're complaining about something that happens, and maybe you just say, oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I have a few things I might share from my practice that might be useful. Are you open to hearing that? And you can give them some suggestions about how to reframe things and look at things so that they don't get so upset and angry. I mean, if we could give the gift of patience to people in this world, especially in the day and age that we live in, I mean, how wonderful that would be. Get them to see things perhaps a little bit differently, not always be driven in the same way that they are. So again, giving the Dharma or some medicine of teaching that to others is really important. The next line has to do with morality. Again, I'm going to try not to talk too much about these perfections. After the first few, I probably won't go into great detail. Morality consists of abandoning non-virtuous deeds together with their basis. That's actually said to be one of the three types of morality: to abandon non-virtue, to kind of stay away from those negative deeds. Another one is to adopt a virtue. Remember, we even saw that with that verse. The verse was giving us advice to adopt the 10 virtuous actions that are the opposite of the 10 non-virtues, to protect the lives of others, not to kill them, to do what we can to protect the resources of others as well, to not steal or take things from them that aren't offered to us, and so on. So we want to engage in virtuous deeds on top of just refraining from non-virtue. Then the third one for the bodhisattva practices that is unique to the perfection of morality, the paramita, is to actually try to benefit others through our actions as much as possible. We'll be dedicating, our other time and energy that we have to helping others, to benefiting those who are needing a place to stay, needing resources to sustain their lives, what have you. Kind of falls into generosity to some degree too, sometimes with some of these, but it's also like an extension of our morality. I mean, this is a mistaken idea that I even had a little debate with one of the students who used to come here to teachings in Taos, who thought that what I was saying was that we recognize that we really can't help sentient beings fully until we become a Buddha, which is true to some degree, but that doesn't exclude us from benefiting others now. You know, even if we don't have perfect wisdom and perfect ability, we still should be helping others as best as we can. The bodhisattva doesn't just sit in their cave somewhere isolated from everybody in the world. Bodhisattvas want to be involved in the world and addressing the suffering of the world. It's again kind of a mistaken idea that our whole goal is just to kind of go get enlightened somewhere and then come back and help everybody. No, that's how you actually practice good morality, is benefiting others as best as you can every day of your life as much as possible. So that also, again, can be a practice of morality together with many other practices of generosity and so on. Let's go on to the next one. We've talked extensively about morality in these last few classes. So the ability to endure hardship is patience. Patience, again, is a very powerful practice. They call it the greatest austerity, something that we can all practice. And of course, it's the antidote to our mind of anger or hatred. And the Buddha did say there are 3 types of the perfection of patience. The first one is being able to endure harm from others. This is a hard one, right? Because when people are harming us, the immediate response is to harm them back, or to at least, kind of get in their face and do something. And it's not to say that we shouldn't remove ourselves from the harm of others, but are we developing anger in the face of the harm of others? That's the problem. That's what patience is the antidote towards, is the anger that arises when others harm us. Of course, we have lots of techniques for doing that. The last 2 Saturdays at Santa Fe Center, I was teaching on ways to counteract anger and develop patience. There's a wonderful book by Thupten Chodron called Working with Anger that gives all of those in more detail. But essentially, we need to be kind of looking at things in a very different way when others are harming us. For example, to see that why they're harming us is through the power of their own afflictions. In a sense, they're under the control of their afflictions and are not really in their right mind. As His Holiness often says, you have to separate the person from the action. Yes, the action of harming another being is to be condemned. It is not to be practiced. But the person who is doing that is a being just like us, under the control of their crazy minds, just like us. It's just we often have at least exposure to teachings to help us to counteract some of that. Most beings don't even have that. They try to, I was told by my parents to be patient a zillion times, but did they ever tell me how to be patient? No, right? Be patient, be patient. How do I be patient? Again, Buddha gives many ways, techniques to reframe things so that we can be patient in the face of receiving harm. The second way that we practice patience is patience towards suffering in general. A lot of people don't have a lot of patience around the sufferings of our world and the sufferings of these bodies, for example. The suffering of aging. A lot of people are impatient with all of that, right? Get angry and upset when they look at what's happening to their own bodies. There's a lot of suffering in the world that we just have to accept, and that we can actually even use in positive ways if we're able to. But one of the most important things is to not have anger, instead be patient with the sufferings that happen, the suffering of, crazy drivers on the road, the suffering of bad weather, the suffering of whatever. This is the world we live in. There's all kinds of stuff that can annoy you and get your goat, but it's up to you. Can you be patient in the face of the variety of sufferings that you experience? These again are not things caused by harm by another person. These are just what we have to live with in our world. The third one is patience in our practice of the Dharma. This is, again, kind of unique to Buddhism to some degree in terms of how it's framed. But most spiritual traditions require some level of patience and endurance, tolerance. We have to be able to endure what we have to go through to change our minds. It takes a lot. This Buddhist path is not like, overnight you're a Buddha, right? This is day in and day out, tending to our minds, being meticulous and observing what's going on, all of our behavior, and doing everything we can to counteract it and to create the more virtuous states of mind. It takes a lot of patience to do that. So when we see ourselves getting upset at ourselves for not being there, for not doing as good a job, or whatever the case might be, or whatever comes up in our spiritual practice, remember to practice patience there too. The next one is effort, or sometimes called joyous perseverance or joyous enthusiasm. It says there, the third line down, effort consists of the willingness to perform virtuous deeds, and meditation is the one-pointed fixing of the mind upon a virtuous object. So these are the fourth and the fifth. I'm not going to talk that much more about effort, but don't think that we're talking about just this kind of nose to the grindstone sort of thing. That's why often the word joyous is put in there. For the Bodhisattva, we should be so delighted to be practicing virtue. When someone asks, I need some money, can you help me? That should be like music to our ears. Like, oh, we have this wonderful opportunity to engage in some behavior that will be of benefit to others and to ourselves as well. Of course, we do get some benefit from that, but the primary thing is we are so enthusiastic about practicing virtue, the virtue of giving, the virtue of having good morality, and so on. Effort is kind of the energy that gets you totally engaged and taking delight in all this virtue. Again, if you're not there yet, that's okay. They say that your effort eventually should be as joyous as a child engaged in play, where all that children do. I mean, if you see children, my brother was amazing. He would play by himself so much because he was like 6 years younger than me. So I didn't really want to play with him that much. I don't know. I was off to other things. But he would entertain himself for hours and hours and just be so happy with all of it, right? Children at play is a good example for how we should look when we're doing our Dharma practice. We just get totally lost and absorbed in it and just are so happy to be doing whatever it is we're doing. Not just, again, our formal practice, but what we're doing off the cushion as we're engaging in being with others, working on our minds, what have you. And that's our main practice. We need the work on the cushion and so on and all these other practices to support it. But effort or enthusiasm is really vital. We're not going to get anywhere without it. The next one that was mentioned was concentration or samadhi. Again, that is developing at least the state that we call calm abiding or something approaching that. Again, this is something taught in all the Lamrim texts that all of you think have had some exposure to. It's the perfection of concentration means to develop that shamatha or calm abiding, a mind that can rest single-pointedly on whatever meditation object we choose for as long as one wishes, with a lightness, a pliability, the serviceability of the mind and the body. It's a really unique state that can be attained through deep concentration, developing that especially through a period of intense retreat where we are separated from our daily activities and can focus primarily on concentration. You develop what is called a pliancy of the mind and body, where your mind and body become very serviceable. When we sit down to meditate, our minds often feel very heavy, or else we're bouncing off the walls in a sense with all kinds of thoughts. Or, the body also feels very dense and they say your body feels like a cotton ball, just insubstantial. You don't have this heaviness of the body at all. And the mind the same way. The mind can be directed wherever you wish to, investigating this, meditating on that, what have you. You say again, it's a profound state. And as I mentioned earlier, in that state, the afflictions tend not to arise. You haven't gotten rid of them yet. You need the sixth perfection and, the uniting that practice with wisdom to do that. But you cause them to be suppressed so that they do not appear. They do not have the causes and conditions for them to arise. So again, that's a very profound practice right there. The last one, the last perfection, is introduced in the next line, wisdom. True and exact knowledge constitutes wisdom, the prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom. Of course, I'm not going to talk about this in extensively tonight, because we will get into teachings later in the text where it talks about that wisdom, which is primarily the wisdom knowing reality, the wisdom of emptiness. All right. which is, again, where you become an Arya, when you develop that union of calm abiding, the concentrated mind, together with special insight, the wisdom mind, that are the basis upon which you develop that deep understanding and insight into emptiness. Okay, so then continuing further, all these 6 practices are to be supported by bodhicitta, the Bodhi mind, and the wisdom which does not conceptualize the 3 spheres, meaning we have to try to see the emptiness of the agent, ourselves, the action we're engaging in, and the object of that action. So in the act of giving, or actually 2 objects, there's the person we're giving to as well as the object that we're giving, but then there's the act of giving and us as the giver. We want to see them all as lacking inherent existence, empty of inherent existence. Again, that's that wisdom. All of our practices ideally to become Mahayana practices need to be united with bodhicitta together with that wisdom realizing emptiness to some degree, even if it's only conceptual. The next line in the text, being supported by the Bodhi mind, they do not fall within the purview of the Shravakas and Pratyekas, or Pratyeka Buddhas, they're often called, and are thus immeasurable. So too, because the 3 spheres are not conceptualized, wisdom is extended to its furthest limit. Hence, they are also called paramitas, those which have reached the far side. So what's being pointed out here, these Shravakas and Pratyekas, or Pratyeka Buddhas, these are the 2 practitioners of what is often called the Hinayana path. Hinayana is a little derogatory, meaning kind of lower vehicle, lower path. So they often use fundamental vehicle to translate that, or individual vehicle. Shravakas are usually translated as hearers. Pratyeka Buddhas are translated as solitary realizers. There are these 2 different types of practitioners that are intent upon achieving their own liberation. They are of that more fundamental vehicle. They have not yet seen and accepted, and perhaps they've seen it, but they haven't accepted it as their own, the Mahayana path, the path to Buddhahood, the path that goes beyond one's own nirvana, one's own peace and freedom, to actually seek a greater result. So this practice of adding any practice of generosity and morality and so on with bodhicitta, the Bodhi mind, and the wisdom realizing emptiness is unique to the Mahayana, is a means of accomplishing the 6 perfections fully, is a mean of becoming enlightened fully. And that's what we're going to get at in regard to the remaining part of this section. Get down to the next bottom, the next part. There'll be some verses that are cited. We say that these are crucial in developing ourselves all the way to Buddhahood. Having both Bodhi mind, the mind that is intent upon achieving enlightenment for the sake of others, that is our compassion wing, together with the wisdom wing, that is the mind that realizes the emptiness of all phenomena, that nothing has inherent existence. These 2 wings of the bird, as we often say, are what will allow us to get to the shore of enlightenment. Without either one of them, we can't do that. You know, those on the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha path do have the wisdom. They have to have a wisdom realizing emptiness to some degree, or else they cannot remove their afflictions and cannot achieve nirvana. But they lack this wing in its entirety, pretty much. They can develop their own compassionate mind and loving mind, what have you. They do, but they don't ever have it united with the wish to become a Buddha, which is, again, what bodhicitta is all about. So let's go to the text and see the rest of the explanation of this section, because it gets into the whole thing of the essential nature of these paramitas. Okay. To develop these paramitas means that they should be practiced in such a manner that they become ever more highly perfected. And once the other side of the ocean of existence has been reached, one should attain the lordship of the victors, that is Buddhahood, which conveys others there as well. That's the whole goal. The 6 perfections are to ripen your mind completely so you can become a savior. Rinpoche liked this word for some reason. We don't use it as often in Buddhism, but you can be the main person being responsible for helping all sentient beings to be free from samsara and to achieve their greatest potential, to actually come to that shore as well. Okay. Of these 6, the paramitas of generosity, morality, and patience constitute the accumulation of merit. Now, Rinpoche would call this the accumulation of the merit of virtue. He liked that phrase. He considers both of these to be merits, the merit of wisdom and the merit of virtue. But the idea is that we need an accumulation of the things that are mainly our practice of compassion in the world, giving to others out of a desire to benefit them, practicing morality so we don't harm them, being patient so that we can actually help them because of being closer to them and not being, having this mind of anger towards them. Those are the main ones involved in accumulating merit. Then it says here, this accumulation of merit provides bodhisattvas with abundant well-being in higher states of existence while they remain in samsara, and upon the achievement of perfect Buddhahood, serves as the cause for the Buddha's form body, the Rupakaya. This latter constitutes the perfection of others' concerns. So again, we need to have the form body. So essentially what we are talking about here, again, these two wings of a bird, we're going to focus on this one first. Generosity, morality, patience are all practices that are together, especially with bodhicitta, especially with a compassion and wishing to benefit others. Through that energy, practicing in that way, you develop the ability to benefit others, which is called the Rupakaya, the form bodies. These are actually physical bodies. These are ways that Buddhas manifest to benefit others. We talked about them briefly when we went through the recollection of the Buddha jewel, right? This is the main goal, actually, for bodhisattvas. They're not as concerned about their own welfare. They're concerned about the welfare of others. How do we actually achieve the welfare of others? By actualizing the form bodies, actualizing a way to appear to others. Now, where are these Buddhas appearing? Well, we had Buddha Shakyamuni, certainly, who is said to be an appearance of that Buddha's energy, that Buddha's wisdom in this world. But anyone can be a Buddha. Anything can be a Buddha. Buddhas can be immaterial objects, non-material objects. They can be material objects. They can be whatever. I mean, Buddhas will manifest in whatever way is beneficial for others. And that's, again, due to the karma of sentient beings. But Rupakaya, it says form bodies, but again, we can think really broadly. Any way that Buddhas are involved in helping other sentient beings is sort of a manifestation of that kind of energy. Very crucial, again, part of it. We accumulate the causes for that through engaging in virtuous actions towards others, especially, again, generosity, patience, morality. Let's talk about the other side of it. Well, actually, I think there's a verse here quoted before we get into the other side of it. This is from the Madhyamaka. I think we quoted this verse before in Rendawa's commentary. This is the text by Chandrakirti that is an illumination of what Nagarjuna said in his fundamental wisdom. These three dharmas, generosity and patience and morality, were recommended especially for householders by the Sugatas. These very same are called the merit accumulation, cause of the Buddha's body of form. So we see that these are being singled out in this verse as the primary practices of householders, lay people. Why? Because generally we're working in jobs, we have more resources to be generous with. That is ideally the situation, that we have enough material things, we have the ability to protect others, what have you. We have a life that is engaged with people in the world. So we are practicing morality, perhaps to a greater degree. We also are needing to be patient with everyone in the world around us, right? Something we see, as I said, even more prominently in our day and age. These are the sorts of things we can do with this lay life that we have currently. That's why we've already had extreme attention being paid to generosity and morality, right? Because these are really foundational practices for every Buddhist, but for lay people like ourselves, so important to not neglect. These are one of the main things we can do with this human life we have. And while we're at it, we can practice patience. We can be patient and tolerant of others around us, so we're not filling the world with more flames of anger, and continuing to cause harm and suffering all over the place. All right. So let's go on then to the other side, the wisdom side, the kind of accumulation of knowledge or wisdom. That's what is being covered in this next part. So the knowledge accumulation is comprised of the paramitas of meditation and wisdom. Remember, 5 and 6 we often put together, and they are the ones that get a lot of attention in the Lamrim text because we have to learn the very detailed techniques of developing calm abiding and the insight into emptiness and uniting those two. the union of calm abiding and special insight. So, as it says here, while the bodhisattva remains in samsara, it is a cause both of their remaining untainted by the impurities of samsara and of their giving aid to others. Upon the achievement of perfect Buddhahood, it is the cause for the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body. This is the wisdom or truth body of the Buddha. This body constitutes the fulfillment of one's own concerns. It is stated in the scripture Ratnavali that the form body of the Buddhas is born from the accumulation of merit or merit of virtue. The Dharma body, in brief, O king, is born from the accumulation of the merit of knowledge, the merit of wisdom. So let me take it off screen and talk about these again. When we look at this side of the equation, by continuing to further and progress our wisdom realizing emptiness, especially through the force of deep concentration being united with that, you create the causes for the purification of your own mind, the removal of everything that taints your mind, that obscures your mind. All the afflictions, all of the roots of the afflictions, the ignorance, all the seeds of that. And moreover, the very subtle imprints of that are keeping your mind from being the mind of a Buddha. When you achieve the Dharmakaya, the Dharma body of a Buddha, you have an omniscient mind at that point. It's kind of mind-boggling for us to think about what an omniscient mind would be like. But this is, again, a mind that knows all phenomena at all times and is therefore in the best position to manifest the form bodies through that wisdom that will be of benefit to beings. So these come together. You never can attain the Dharmakaya without the form body, the form Rupakaya. You can never attain the Rupakaya without the Dharmakaya. When you attain enlightenment, it's said that this happens instantly, that once you cross that threshold and you have Buddha mind, then you've got the full Dharmakaya in all of its glory, manifesting immediately at that moment in the form bodies of a Buddha to benefit others. And kind of mind-blowing when we think about it, but this is what we're aiming for. This is the goal, is to not just go become a Buddha and check out and go hang out at the Buddha bar with all the other Buddhas, it's so that you can actually be active in the world and spontaneously, effortlessly, and perfectly in line with what beings need, with their karma, with exactly what will benefit them in that moment. So again, this is the accumulation of this wisdom. This merit of wisdom brings about the realizations in your own mind. That is the basis from which you then are able to actualize the needs of others through the form bodies of a Buddha. To think about these two dimensions, I mean, we all have these two dimensions in our lives right now, right? We have kind of our own mind that isn't really privy to other people, right? It's kind of your own private personal world, right? You might share your thoughts with others, but even that doesn't really get completely at what it is like to have those thoughts. This is your own domain. So you're taking that personal space of your own private domain and bringing it to its culmination in the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, which is still private. We can't access that as human beings or sentient beings, right? Then we have what we call our interpersonal dimension, which is the embodied form that we're in, where we can speak and act with others and do whatever, right? That's more evident to others. What's going on in our minds is completely hidden from other people. That's, again, what we ripen into the Dharmakaya, what we ripen in a sense through our actions in the world and the things that we do, utilizing our bodies that we have and so on, our connection with others, ripens into the form bodies. Kind of makes sense. Now, again, in Tantra, there's a slightly different explanation about how all that comes about. But there is no Buddhahood without both of those coming to their maturation, without fully ripening our own wisdom mind into that Dharmakaya and our own accumulation of virtue into the Rupakayas, the form bodies of a Buddha. All right. Just a little bit left of this. Effort. We didn't talk about effort, right? We did the first three were the practices of accumulating virtue. The last two were the causes of wisdom. Where does effort fit into the picture? So that's the very next paragraph. As it says there, effort is a cause for both accumulations. Once again, in the Madhyamakavatara of Chandrakirti, it says, all that is of virtue follows effort and is the cause of both the merit or the virtue and the wisdom, the knowledge accumulations. The level where effort comes ablaze is the fourth ground called radiant light. Again, that's part of that text. It goes through the 10 grounds or bhumis where these perfections are brought to greater states of culmination. But essentially, we need effort to achieve any of these qualities. Thus, the 6 paramitas encompass the 2 accumulations. And since these 2 produce all the well-being of bodhisattvas, both during their presence in samsara and in their attainment of nirvana, it is determined that the entire Mahayana path is contained in these 6 paramitas. So again, we need the perfection of effort to further both of them from the practices of primarily of generosity, morality, and patience. That fulfills the welfare of others. We are able to then become form beings that can benefit others. Through our concentration and our wisdom, those perfections, we achieve the fulfillment of our own welfare, the full ripening of our own mind into the mind of a Buddha. These 2, again, are always there together, benefiting and enhancing the experience of, Buddhahood. Okay. All right, that finishes this first section, the first sort of chapter. Yes, let's see if
I'm
this.
sorry, but
Please.
Mubakaya is another word for form body, right?
Correct. Yes.
And the wisdom body, is that on Bobakaya or?
Okay. Let's.
There's
Yeah.
Kaya, it's like trying to keep them straight.
So if you didn't hear Stella's question, she's asking about these kayas because there's different presentations. Let's start with the 2. When we say Rupakaya and Dharmakaya, these are usually translated as the form body and the truth body. Usually Dharmakaya is translated as truth body. Sometimes we talk about it as being wisdom body, but technically that's a subdivision of that. So we have these 2. That's kind of a nice place to start because it just sort of meets this little dual thing that we're talking about. Within the form body, there are actually said to be 2 main divisions. One is the Sambhogakaya that you mentioned. Sambhogakaya is usually translated as complete enjoyment body. What that is when you've accumulated kind of the merit through all of your actions with bodhicitta and what have you, you attain a body in a pure land that is also a product of you having purified your mind. And it is only attainable, accessible by these bodhisattva aryas who have direct realization of emptiness, who are bodhisattvas. This is kind of like your own little pure land where you have a higher level of wisdom that can be disseminated to people. And so bodhisattvas who have attained that level of wisdom can actually manifest there and receive teachings from that form of a Buddha. And so oftentimes when we talk about these Buddhas and their pure lands and whatever, that's what we're talking about, is a pure land that's accomplished by that Buddha through the practices they did on the path, that becomes their kind of abode, if you will. Not that they're solely there because their mind is everywhere. The minds of Buddhas extend to all dimensions. But that is kind of their abode where they have this pure land and where they teach these high-level bodhisattvas. And they only teach them the Mahayana Dharma and so on. There's all these other details about that. The second of the form bodies is usually just called Nirmanakaya or emanation body. The emanation bodies can be anything. They say Buddhas can appear as cars or planes or rocks. They can appear as animals. They can appear as human beings. They can appear as gurus. I mean, this is one of the ways that we often think of our gurus and try to think of our gurus, is that they are the appearance of Buddhas in a physical form for us to be able to learn the Dharma from them. And it makes sense that our gurus, you have to check up your gurus, but it would make sense that gurus would be the most likely candidates to be Buddhas, right? Because they're the ones doing the work of the Buddhas. I mean, I pray for the day when our politicians are Buddhists. I mean, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Instead, we looks like, I don't know for sure because we don't know who anybody is, but it looks like we end up with a lot of ordinary beings in that role. But Buddhas appear and emanate in a variety of ways. They can, throughout the teachings of the Buddha, when he would talk about stories of the past and everything, he would say, this Buddha appeared as this and what have you. Buddhas can appear in whatever way is suitable for the welfare of sentient beings. So the 2 main divisions of Rupakaya are Sambhogakaya, complete enjoyment body, and Nirmanakaya,
And they're from the form body.
emanation body, right? That's the form body.
Okay.
Now, when we get over to the Dharmakaya, it can be divided into two as well. The main one that we generally talk about is the Jnana Dharmakaya, which is the wisdom truth body, which is the enlightened mind of a Buddha. It is your own mind right now, having all of the obscurations removed, all the qualities fully developed. It's the culmination of all of your practice in terms of your own welfare. It brings you to the apex of your being. That is the wisdom truth body. The other body that's singled out when we talk about four bodies of the Buddha, the two over here and two over here, is what's called the Svabhavikakaya. Svabhavikakaya. It's the nature truth body. It consists of kind of two elements to it. One is it's the emptiness of the mind of the Buddha, the wisdom Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body. So it's actually an emptiness. It's the lack of an inherent existence. It is also the kind of complete removal of all the adventitious afflictions, all the adventitious obscurations. So it's like the culmination of the true cessations that we create on the path being brought to that level. So it has complete purity from inherent existence because it is empty of inherent existence. And it also has complete purity from everything that defiled the mind, all the adventitious states. So we talk about that as a separate component because it's an important part of being a Buddha, that mind of a Buddha, that is the wisdom Dharmakaya, has a nature that is complete purity. Again, it comes into play more when we start looking at Buddha nature and other things and what have you, but that's the four bodies of a Buddha.
So we're talking about the mind with no obscurations.
The quality of it having no obscurations at that point, that purity, together with the purity from inherent existence, which is its emptiness, is what we mean by the nature truth body. And that's always together again with the Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body, the Jnana Dharmakaya. So these two are always together, of course, in any fully enlightened mind. Because that's what it means to be fully enlightened, have a fully enlightened mind, is that you've removed all the obscurations and you, of course, have no inherent existence of that mind whatsoever, because that's the reality for all phenomena. All right.
Thank you.
Sorry to do that little detour into the four kayas, but
I feel like I need to have
yeah.
an outline in front of me all the
there
time.
actually is a little chart that maybe I can send to John or whatever, you can get it to folks. It's like a little chart of these, but it's a chart pertaining primarily to the teachings on Buddha nature. So I don't want to make it too confusing. Let me see if I can find something that would be more appropriate. But so sometimes they talk about the three kayas. Well, what's that? How do they get those? They keep these two over here, the two rupa kayas, the two form bodies, and they simply talk about this as one Dharmakaya. So we stop at the level of up here, and in this we break down into two. That would be the three kayas. Then if we talk about four kayas, then we're down to 2 and 2. If you talk about 2 kayas, then you're just up at the level of Rupakaya and Dharmakaya. It gets confusing. And kaya, again, is usually translated as body, but don't think of it as a physical body, because over here, Dharmakaya, what is Dharmakaya? It is the fully enlightened mind of the Buddha that is non-material, together with, the emptiness of that mind and the purity of that mind. Those are things that we can't look at physically and point to, right? They're not a body. Kaya just means a sort of a component of an experience of the fully enlightened existence.
And so the reason that they call it the Dharma Kaya
Mhm.
is, I'm thinking Dharma, that's the teachings of the Buddha, and that's existence the way it is, the way it really truly is.
Yeah, the question was about Dharmakaya. Is it called Dharma Kaya because the Dharma of the Buddha, the truth of the Buddha? I think that's the derivation, essentially, is that you're getting to where the truth that the Buddha taught, which is what the Dharma jewel is brought to its culmination there. And of course, Dharma jewel, we often divide into the true paths and the true cessation. So in a sense, they're both there in Dharmakaya as well, because we have the complete cessation of all the afflictions and we have the complete realization of all the paths. So, all right. Maybe before I go on, are there any other questions? Because we are getting close to the end of our time. Sorry again for this little detour, but I think it was, hopefully it was helpful. Yeah, Mary Jo has a question.
So I sent away and got the book.
Uh-huh.
And are these things in the book?
The four bodies of the Buddha.
And,
Uh,
and the, paramitas? I
Mhm.
mean, are we in a certain chapter of the
Yeah.
book?
Yeah, let me, what Mary Jo is asking about is the book that many of you ordered. We did have again a discount for a while of this book. I'm sorry for those of you who weren't able to purchase one with the discount, but Wisdom did that very kindly for us for a short period of time. We are in the section, again, we just talked about verse 8, I think was what we were on. No, yeah, patience, enthusiastic perseverance. We're about page 55 is where that verse starts. So I think when we finish this section on the six paramitas, and there is much more there on them than what I'm able to give tonight, will be the concluding chapter 2. So where we've gone through now is through chapter 2, about page 64. All right. And again, I won't be able to cover everything that Geshe Sopa covers, and that's in part why I wanted to encourage people to read this as well. But there's a lot of wonderful insight into these teachings from Geshe Sopa there. So any other questions before we, because I will go ahead and introduce the next section at least. We don't have time maybe for more, but no questions? Okay, let's go and look at again. This one is called now chapter 2, but I'm using, this is the way it was assembled into this little book, which again, you do have an ability. That's again something that is in the reading list that has been circulated. A link to this out on the internet that you can download as a PDF. It's kind of each of these pressed into a copy machine, I think, and loaded up on the internet as a full book. And I'm kind of taking this book and copying it into the Word file because it's really hard to get this on the screen. So essentially, that's what we're looking at when I share the text. I don't have the entire text done this way, or I would share it with you. I only have the first, I don't know, 40 pages or something done. 40 pages of a Word file, again, that I am using. In this book, it's called Chapter 2. We're now moving into the topic of instruction directed primarily to householders. We've already seen, again, I touched on a number of things, but remember the whole first section that we just finished, verses 4 through 7, pertains to advice for both householders and monastics. So chapter 2 has 9 sections. The first concerns the honoring of one's father and mother. And it sounds like what we got in the 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt honor thy father and mother, right? Buddhism adheres to the same concept, but for perhaps slightly different reasons. I don't know. So the first one, respecting one's father and mother. Any family revering father and mother will be attended by Brahma and religious teachers. In other words, will have the good fortune of attracting that kind of influence of great beings, high status beings, religious teachers, gurus, what have you. Its members will be renowned for venerating them and later enter the higher states. So they kind of are pointing out that a lot of our practice of virtue is complemented by honoring our parents. Now, why are our parents so important in Buddhism is because our birth parents in particular, though obviously if you weren't raised by your birth parents, other people maybe played a more direct role in your care, but our birth parents at least gave us this body and often were quite involved in our care when we were very vulnerable and young. You know, the archetype of the loving mother in particular is such a strong one in so many cultures, right? Not to discount fathers, but nonetheless mothers because of the strong connection they have to their child, having carried the child in the womb and given birth and nursed the child and done so many things to attend to the child, is often, a very powerful bond. For the children, the parents are important because they gave that human body to that being, right? Now, again, it's our karma that created that body. We did have a role in that through our practice of morality, but they required the physical matter that became your body. You might even wonder, well, and they had a good time doing it, but nonetheless, that's not to discount what was actually done there. I mean, it's a profound gift for that to come together to form life, the body that is the continuity of which you still have with you right now. It started off as two little cells, the sperm cell that entered into the egg cell in your mother's womb that became, attached to the womb and started dividing and growing and becoming a fetus and eventually coming out of the womb. That continuity of that body is still here right now. Not the same cells, obviously, but the same body and that continuity, right? So it's an incredible gift. It makes a very special connection to our parents. Your parents are a higher object of practice and of honoring and whatever than most other beings. The beings that are higher than them are like monastics and certainly gurus. Gurus are said to be the highest object of practice, but our parents are really quite central to our well-being. So let's see if we can finish up this little section. There's really not much to this. And then we can start with the next practice or the second section of this. The family which respectfully honors its father and mother will be free of both human and non-human harm. That they will be attended by Brahma means they will receive the blessings of the gods, and attended by spiritual teachers means they will also receive the blessings acquired through the special virtues of holy persons, holy beings who are gurus and so on. An immediate benefit of such reverence is that in this very life, it will give rise to a good reputation. As for the future, it will enable the attainment of birth in the higher states. Hence, those who live as householders should take great care to honor father and mother. In our culture, we've gotten away from the more traditional ways that parents and grandparents were cared for by their families, right? I mean, it still happens in many communities. I'm not denying that. But most people move away from their parents, right? And live in whole other states and countries, perhaps even than where their parents are. And they often aren't even as involved in their parents' care as their parents age and require more things to keep them comfortable and what have you. And we have lots of these facilities, that house people who are in that block that are requiring care that children aren't there to give to. Now, some people don't have children to play that role, but we should be mindful of this. And Geshe Sopa in his book does go into a bit of a discussion about the importance of caring for parents, particularly when they're quite vulnerable. So if we have that opportunity, we should, again, going back to that joyous effort, we should go, this is wonderful that I get to play this role, and leave behind the things that we normally might be preoccupied with to want to be there, to help, to care for them. And some of you perhaps have already done that with parents who have passed on, and know the value of that, of being there and being able to attend to their needs as much as possible. It's hard work, admittedly, but it's important because, again, they become as vulnerable and as necessary, they need as much care as what we did when we were young and vulnerable, right? And in fact, it kind of looks identical in some ways. The degeneration that happens with the body is very similar in terms of needing to be cared for in ways that we required when we were quite young. So our mother often, even our fathers, perhaps grandparents, whoever, they played a central role in our welfare then. We should be equally desiring to play that role for them in their aging years. So that's good enough on tonight. I think we're at the time limit anyway. Any final comments or questions on what we covered?
Well, no, just a quick little comment. That last paragraph that you read, did that mean that the prayers that the parents and grandparents say for their children would have a benefit for the kids?
I'm not sure that that's what it's saying. Stella was asking if this last paragraph, let's go through that last paragraph real quickly. An immediate benefit of such reverence, revering our parents, paying homage to our parents, honoring them, attending to them, is that in this very life, it will give rise to a good reputation. That's kind of one thing, right? As for the future, it will enable the attainment of birth in the higher states, right? Because these are very virtuous acts to give our time, our energy, even perhaps our resources to care for our parents. Hence, those who live as householders should take great care to honor father and mother.
Okay, I guess I was talking about, it said,
Oh, the other
they
paragraph?
will receive the blessings of the gods attended by spiritual teachers.
Yeah.
Means that they will receive the blessings acquired through the special virtues of holy men.
Kind of, again, having those influences in one's life, people of greater stature and of course spiritual depth and heaviness, the gurus,
Yeah, because I always think about my grandmothers and I feel like they must have been praying for me somewhere along the way.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that's literally what's meant here as much as we create the karma by caring for our parents to have this in our lives.
Oh, okay, so it
Right.
has to do with the care that we give to our
Exactly,
parents and
exactly.
grandparents.
It's not the grandparents become overseers or parents become overseers of us and bless us. It's that we create the causes then to have these higher beings attend to us. It's kind of an interesting karma when you think about that. We attend to our parents, which are high objects for us, and the karma is you will be attended to or attended by these high beings. So that's the idea behind it. That's the type of karma that's created. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other comments, questions? I think we're at the limit here, 7:31. All right. Let's go ahead and do our prayers. And again, Jana, well, do we want to say the names first? I wasn't sure whether I've been kind of doing the names at the end, the dedication names. Do them before we do the prayers. Okay, we're going to recite the names of those on the dedication list. And I may even have a few to add because,
Okay, so we get them at the end here.
yeah,
For obstacles, Gina, Robin C, Yvonne, Joaquin, Margie, Joa, Servati, Dia, Ersu, Asa, and children. Asa and children.
Stella,
And-
I'd like to add Jenny.
Who?
Jenny.
Jenny? Okay,
Jenny.
okay. And under illness, Jane, Rolf, Joanne, Rosemarie, Elena, Ken, Clara, Yvonne, Don, John, Margie, Rosemary, Patty, Bill, and Yvonne.
and I'd like to add Mummy Max. Many of you know Sister Max, Mummy Max, who has been involved in the FPMT from the early days. And she actually is very ill and probably moving towards death. And if any of you are wanting to visit her, if you know her, let me know because, yeah.
Okay. And Death, Eve, Dubler, John, Elise, the man who jumped, Bill Woodall, Bonnie B, and Norm.
And back on illness, we also have Amata requesting healing for her mother. And then we can add Amata as well because of, again, still dealing with the flu. And then for death, add Cody. Tegan has asked that we add Cody.
Cody. Okay.
Any other additions? All right, now we can get the prayers on the screen and do our dedication prayers. There they are.
Due to the merits
So
of
these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
May
The supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase.
The
Wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Then we'll go forward to Oso's prayer. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And then for Rinpoche. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of the reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers, and those online for being here and your help with the teachings, and then everyone here. Really
Thank you.
appreciate the opportunity to share these teachings with you. So we'll be back next Thursday, same time, same channel. Okay. All right, everyone, be well.
Thank you.
Take care
Thank
now.
you, Donna.